Come now, people. Come take a seat by the window. It's time for a tale. Oh, look, we've got a nice fireplace there to keep us warm, and what looks like probably a steaming cup of hot chocolate alongside a book to read. What a better setting could you ask for a story? Ooh, candles, owls, bookends. What's this up here? A picture. Oh, that's a picture of some dark street. Okay, yeah, very nice. Oh, and an owl in the corner. Subscribe, some sort of owl. Oh, there's a lot of owls going on. We like owls. Any hoot. I'm here for a story, so yeah, we've got a nice backdrop. Might put this on when I go to bed. I figure we've been introduced to a couple of my passions, hip-hop and autism, so I might as well give a little bit of context. I might as well do these videos early on while nobody's listening, because, you know, it's law. You can go back in the future and listen to the law, and here it is. So yeah, autism. How did I get interested in autism? So the typical route, I think, for a lot of people is either themselves or family members. I'd say that wasn't my route. Pretty sure I'd probably heard the word autism, but I definitely had no clue what autism was. And then I can remember hearing like Asperger's syndrome. I can remember my brother's like saying, "No, I'm pretty sure Keith's got Asperger's syndrome. It just doesn't seem to get kind of social cues or give like normal feedback." And I can remember having that thought that, okay, right, well, that's something to do with like social skills. But yeah, I knew nothing about autism up to, I don't know, let's say the year 2008. And then in 2009, I got a job as a cleaner in a special school, and I did that for a couple of years, just being a cleaner, and then towards the end I got offered a teaching assistant's role, and then ended up working there for 10 years, or 15 years. 15 years including the cleaning, and about, I don't know, 13 years. It's hard to gauge because I worked there solid for 10 years, and then I did a bit of supply either side, and did a bit of voluntary before I actually fully started working there. But yeah, I did loads of roles in there as well. I won't go into each of those roles, just a TA, so I was working alongside hundreds of children with autism over the years, different classes, different age groups, different stages, different abilities, just, different individual profiles, different personalities. And I was very quickly drawn to autism. And I think a lot of people are, because a lot of like behaviours that are prominent in autistic people resonate with the general population. Actually, that's why you get that silly phrase, "Oh, we're all a little bit autistic." Well, I understand, there's a level of empathy there. You're recognising behaviours or things that people with autism are doing that you do. But you're not autistic. If you're not autistic, you're not autistic. We're not all autistic. We're all human. We share behaviours. If they're in if there's a collection of them in the extremity, to the point that it interferes with your ability to live a typical life, then yeah, maybe you do have autism. But until that point, you're just someone with an extreme interest, or some sort of sensory aversion, or some sort of sensory seeking behaviours, or you're prone to faux pas, whichever it is, whichever the trait is that you're comparing. Anyway, yeah. So autism, very passionate about autism. Work with loads of people. And it's weird because I don't go, "Oh, I'm passionate about the people," so to speak, because I just see autistic people as normal people. Now, that said, there are plenty of things that are maybe more typical within the autistic population than in the general population that is pretty fascinating. And ultimately it boils down to like a different neurochemistry or some sort of different neurological wiring. Things like, you end up with people who are like autistic savants. Now that's obviously like the extreme end, but just like people who like specific sensory seeking behaviour fascinates me in itself. So it could be someone who's amazing with numbers and memory, or it could be someone with echolalia who likes to make certain sounds in certain rooms at certain corners, so you get a certain echo. I find all of that fascinating, and the variation, the unlimited variation of kind of just if you just take the sensory stuff into account, and never mind the kind of social stuff or mental health things. Or there's a whole cluster. Just the sensory stuff is infinite in how it can manifest in someone who either has sensory processing disorder or autism. So that fascinated me from the get-go, and within the first couple of weeks of me working in this special school, there was a talk. They paid for this lady to come in, and it was, do you know what, I was so lucky to catch them, because I think it was like the only time in the 10 years I worked there solid that they ever like got someone who probably cost considerable amount of money to come in and train, and they were brilliant. And they spoke about a specific approach called intensive interaction. Now, they'd come in a day before and they'd met a few kids for the first ever time. They'd had no information about them, and they'd worked with them and filmed it, and the next day she'd kind of talked the whole school on a training day. She showed the videos and talked through the interactions. And what we kind of saw on that day was like this lady who was like, I don't know, in her 70s at the time, working with some of the most hard to reach they were hard to reach in that it was hard to engage with them, and if you did engage with them closely, there was a chance that you may trigger a negative behaviour from them. And we're talking about non-verbal children with autism and severe learning disabilities. So we're not talking about naughty children who punch when punch out. So yeah, she worked with these kids, and we saw these videos of her like engaging with them, getting responses out of them that there were staff who would work there for 10 years, some who wouldn't go too scared to go near some of these kids, and some who had just never been able to like build a relationship. And she did it through this practice, intensive interaction, which I'm absolutely going to talk about more in the future. And I was just drawn in by it, and I was also drawn in by her descriptions of like the theory, the neurology behind it and why it works. So yeah, from there I was kind of hooked, and I went on then to just devour any sort of autism literature from history, historic studies, my most important ones were like books by people with autism, books by parents of people with autism and typically severe learning disabilities. I also branched out into general LD as well, like learning disabilities, because there's an absolute crossover. If you've got a severe to profound learning disability, there's a very strong chance you've probably got a lot of the autism symptoms as well, and it's probably better to treat those individuals like they have, because if you're wrong, there's no problem, but if you're right, you're definitely going to help them facilitate. You're going to help facilitate like a better experience of living. So yeah, intensive interaction. That lady's name as well, who'd come to the school, her name was Phoebe Cordwell. Well worth checking out. She's kind of taken intensive interaction and kind of made it into responsive communication, which is pretty cool. So I was hooked. At that point I was hooked, and since I've pretty much I've put together like an autism library. My books are pretty significant, from all those places, history, contemporary books, social books, education books, a lot of intensive interaction books. So yeah, maybe a book review or just a book description sort of thing wouldn't go amiss. Maybe if I just sit, talk through it, talk about my opinions or what I got from the book, and do a chat GPT synopsis of them. So that's how I got into autism, and I suppose along the way, I have definitely recognised shared symptoms, and I find it funny that when I was working in the school, a lot of people pointed out um, that um, that that I absolutely did have autistic traits, but I was always like resistant. But the one I don't think anybody pointed out that I do think gets me is like poor executive functioning skills. I do think I've got poor executive functioning skills, but that's not just an autism thing. It's, it's probably a general neurodiversity thing. Anybody with some manner of neurodiversity probably has varying degrees of poor executive functioning. But that's just one symptom of what would have to be a cluster, and to be diagnosed with either autism, ADHD, there tends to be let's say, I'm making up the numbers, but let's say there's 20 symptoms associated with either of them. You tend to have like 15 symptoms over a certain degree of severity. It might be only 5 have to be that severe, and then the other 10 are medium severe. I'm making that up, but that's the general gist. So yeah, there you go. That's the beginnings of the journey. So I'll leave that story there.